Hello, and welcome to Dead Feminist, where I talk about horror movies and think about them just a little too much. My name is Jade, and today we are looking at Hereditary. This was Ari Aster's 2018 feature film debut, and it was literally one of 2018's most talked about releases. It was everywhere. If you have somehow not seen this film or had it spoiled for you over the last 2 years, I really recommend go watch it. It's 2 hours. It's so good because I'm going to be summarizing the plot of the film start to end, and I'm going to be talking about obviously the ending, the twists throughout. I'm going to be sort of giving my thoughts on what it means and what the deeper meaning of it all is. So grab your tea, let's get into it. Hereditary really starts and ends with Ellen. So the first thing we see, literally the first screen, is her obituary. She's dead. Sorry, that's not funny. She died, and she is survived by her daughter Annie and Annie's children Peter and Charlie. It is worth noting here as well that this is where it's first mentioned that Ellen's husband and her son, so Annie's dad and brother, are both already dead. Keep that in mind. So we, from the perspective of the camera, we pass over a collection of miniature buildings and structures before landing on the house and zooming in to one room. This shot it's so cool. I love it. We go from being in the dollhouse to being in the real house with Peter in bed, Steve coming in, waking him up for the funeral. So Steve he comes in, he wakes up Peter. He asks if he's seen Charlie. I'm gonna come back to the dollhouse. No, he asks if he's seen Charlie. Peter says, no, I haven't seen her. And Steve finds Charlie asleep out in the treehouse, and he wakes her up. He's telling her, go get ready, your mother is waiting in the car. And Annie, Steve, sweetie, I don't mean to tell you how to parent. Maybe wake them up before you're literally leaving to go to a funeral. That might just be me. Just a thought. So at Ellen's funeral, we get, a bit of exposition. So we find out that Annie's relationship with her mother is, let's say, complicated at best. She literally says it feels like a betrayal to be standing at her mother's funeral talking about her mother, who the funeral is for. It kind of gives us an idea of the relationship between Annie and Ellen, and it is shown a little bit more after the funeral. When they get home, when Annie, she's asking Steve, should I be more sad? It's like she doesn't fully know how to feel. Which, is, I feel like that's a relatively common kind of reaction to grief, but it is something that is also, in this context, is an indicator of what the relationship was really like. We're going to talk a little bit more about Annie and Ellen, a lot more, really. For now, we're going back to, the plot of the actual film. So at the funeral, we also have Charlie's nut allergy. That is established before they leave. Charlie pulls out her chocolate bar from her pocket, starts eating it. Steve comes over and that doesn't have nuts, does it? Annie's like, that doesn't have nuts, does it? We don't have the EpiPen. They're kind of fussing over her. It just establishes she has a nut allergy. We've also got at the funeral the symbol on the necklace. So Ellen wears it in her casket. They're doing an open casket funeral. Ellen wears it. Annie wears it. She's wearing it as she's giving her little speech. And Charlie, she goes to see the body and say goodbye to her grandma, I guess. And she kind of turns around and there's this guy kind of back, and he's got the biggest, creepiest grin on his face, and he's just staring at her. I think he waves. It's uncomfortable. He looks so unsettling. This massive smile is so out of place at a funeral. Like, if I was a 13-year-old girl at a funeral, if I was a 13-year-old girl, period, and someone was looking at me like that, I would be power walking the other way. I'd be out. No thank you. I just want to quickly mention here, Rexy, the dog. We meet him when they come home and he's just being a good boy. And this is the warning that he does not survive the movie. You have no idea, like, how sad I am. I hadn't seen it in a while when I was rewatching it for this video. I forgot the poor dog died. And then I saw his little lifeless body and I was so sad. It's not super graphic, to be honest. It's done quite well. You see his little shape. He's like a little shadow. You know, it's pretty dark. You can't see the details, but he's not moving. He's not moving. And it's like, this is a sad film. It's a horror movie, but it's also really sad. I appreciate that the puppy's death was... He's not a puppy, he's a big boy, but I call all dogs puppy. But I appreciate that Rexy's death was, you know, handled tastefully for those of us who just routinely cry over dogs just existing. But like, you know, you could have had one little cutaway shot of him just bolting down the driveway. Like, he gets out, he leaves. It's just so depressing. And I know his name is probably Rex, but Steve calls him Rexy. That is the life I am about. This is my first, what I'm going to call a pet check. So, you know, like, I do want to bring attention to the treatment and sort of handling of animals in various horror films, even if I don't include it in my analysis. So this is going to be like the first pet check where I just kind of pop in throughout points of the video and I say, hey, here's what's happening with the animals in this story. Personally, I don't like when animals are hurt in any movie, let alone in a horror movie. Like, I will cope with the people dying, don't hurt the animals, you know? I just want to draw attention to where it makes sense within the plot and where it's just gratuitous. But thankfully for Hereditary, it does make sense. So back to the plot. After the funeral, you know, everyone's kind of dealing with Ellen's death in their own ways. You know, like, Annie comes into Charlie's room, comforts her, you know, she's telling her, you know, you were Grandma's favorite. You were Ellen's favorite. Okay, so, like, side note, I love this so much. This is why I love this film so much. There's so much story told through, like, these tiny interactions and just, like, this, you know, Annie saying, you were Grandma's favorite. And Charlie saying, oh, Grandma wanted me to be a boy. I don't think Ellen would have said this to her. I mean, not directly. We learned a lot of things about Ellen, but I don't think she would have said this to her, apparently, the favorite child. At least not directly. But I do think Charlie's very perceptive, even if she doesn't fully realize that she's perceiving these things. Yeah, I think Charlie's very perceptive, even if she doesn't always, you know, fully recognize what she's perceiving. Like, even when, like, she was a kid, I think she's been this perceptive for a long time. I mean, she's still a kid. She's 13. I always overthink films, so I really appreciate it when there's actual something there for you to overthink. I like that. So while Annie is trying to cope with her mother's death, you know, she's going through boxes of her old things up in the attic, and you know, she finds a letter saying, forgive me all the things I could not tell you, and that their sacrifices will pale compared to their rewards. That's Ellen's final words to her daughter. Now, Annie had already said at the funeral, Ellen was quite private, so she doesn't seem too surprised at the letter saying, you know, talking about the things she couldn't tell her. And when she wants to leave, she, you know, flicks off the light and she sees Ellen standing in the corner watching her. She turns the light back on and she's gone, so it's okay, right? So the kids go back to school. Peter seems to be coping all right. You know, he's being a teenage boy. There's this girl called Bridget. She sits like in front of him in class. He stares at her, but I don't know, he's like 16, 17, I don't know. You know, his friend texts him if he wants to get high, sort of like turns out, you know, he doesn't pay attention in class, basically. I went to school with people like this. This is a nice little, it's realistic to me. Okay, so I think they're in like English class or something. The teacher is talking about the story they're studying in the class, and if the characters having control over their actions makes their fate more or less tragic, something like that. And this one kid is just like, less. She says, why? She says, because. It's just, oh, I mean, how does it feel being the funniest person in this movie? You know? Even though Peter seems alright, Charlie seems to be struggling a bit more. You know, she's like sketching instead of doing her test, which kind of gets her into trouble with her teacher. She's not massively paying attention. And here is time for another pet check, even though it's not technically a pet, because this is where a pigeon slams into the window of Charlie's classroom, instantly dying. Charlie steals the scissors from her teacher's desk, and you know, you're thinking, oh, what's she doing with those scissors? She goes and she cuts off the heads of the pigeon and like pockets it. Like, she just takes off the head and it's like, yeah, I'll keep this. And that's kind of it. Like, she can see a woman like outside the school grounds watching her take off the bird head. It's kind of it for now. It's a weird scene, especially first time viewing. So later, Steve gets a call from like I guess the funeral directors, or maybe it's the cemetery people. Basically, Ellen's grave has been desecrated. He doesn't tell Annie this. Like, it's like he wants to protect her from the stress. And you know, Annie tells Steve she's going to the movies. Bye. She's actually going to like a group support session, and this kind of kickstarts these two like lying, at least not being fully honest. Even Annie straight up lies. Steve's just not fully honest with her. No, actually, sorry, no, actually, he straight up lies. But for the group support session, we get this really nice big slab of exposition. Annie is, you know, talking about her relationship with her mother, the deaths of her father and her brother, the guilt she feels, and how she doesn't feel supported by her family, which that is probably why she didn't tell Steve where she was really going. There's this really nicely framed shot with Annie in the middle, like slowly zooming in, and I just love Toni Collette. Like, can I just point that out now? I love her so much. She's so good in this. Everybody is so good in this, but I love her. So the next, you know, little while is pretty much them living their lives and dealing with the aftermath of the death. Peter is like smoking at night, so he's kind of like hanging out of his window, so like trying not to get caught, so he can smoke his weed. And you know, his friend texts him, invites him to a party. You know, cool, you've been through a lot, kid, you know, go have some fun. But okay, so oh my gosh, so he leans out of the window to like blow away the smoke, and in that shot you can see the treehouse. And okay, so this has got to be like autumn winter time that this is set, because you can, for the treehouse, from Peter's window you can see his smoke from the treehouse. You can see somebody's breath. Like, it's cold enough to see the person's breath. It's someone's in there. Someone's in there. Somebody's watching him. Who is in there? It's such a subtle little thing. I love how like a lot of this is done quite subtly. You know, it's not done with like massive like music cues to draw your attention to it, but I'm just like, who's there? I don't know. I mean, it's not Charlie. Why would she care enough to watch Peter smoking and texting? And it's not Annie or Steve, because at this point Charlie's the only one who would sleep in the treehouse, and it seems like she mostly just does that when she's sad. And she seems, I mean, she's sad, but like she's okay enough to sleep in her own bed. So who's in there? So hey, Peter's going to a party. Cool beans, kid. You know, the next day, since this happened at night, we're in the next day now, and Charlie's in her room. She's sketching. I think she's snacking her nut-free snacks. She sees this like orb of light sort of dancing about her room, and it kind of goes out her window. It's weird. You know, she's like standing on her bed, like, looking out the window, being like, and then we've got Annie and her miniatures, and Peter comes in to ask to borrow one of the cars to go to the party, which, okay, I'm sorry, hello, one of the cars? One of the cars. Like, okay, so Steve is a psychologist. He's like, you know, Dr. Steve. We see him sending an email to like a coworker, and you know, we see his email address, and he is Dr. Steve. And Annie's an artist. And they have 2 teenage kids. how much money are they making that they have this really big, nice house and at least 2 cars? At least 2. For Peter to ask to borrow one of them. God, how much do they make? Anyway, this conversation, the conversation feels kind of awkward to me as an outsider. Like, if I was at my friend's house and my friend started talking, like if I was Peter's friend and I was at his house at this time and he starts talking to his mother like that, I would be so uncomfortable. It feels like their relationship is a bit strained, and he's like mirroring his behaviors, which he's what, 16, 17? It's not great. It's not a great situation. Peter kind of plays it down as like a chill gathering, which it's a movie party held by a bunch of teenagers. That's never a chilled gathering. So Annie is just like, oh, are you taking your sister? And speaking of Charlie, right now she's walking through the grass of their massive back garden. Like, this thing's like a field. But she's walking through the grass. She's holding the pigeon head like a, she's cupping it in her hands like an offering. And in the distance, she sees Ellen surrounded by fire. So Annie finds Charlie. She yells at her for going out without shoes. Charlie's kind of sulky and, I want grandma, and we're just gonna ignore the fact that she's just talking about with a pigeon head. That's cool, Annie. We're just gonna ignore that. Annie pretty much forces Charlie to go to the party. I understand it's important for kids to socialize, and she's been through a lot. She probably could use some time to have fun, but oh, Annie, sweetie, no, you're gonna wish you never did that. I'm sorry. But, so, okay, Peter drives Charlie to the party. They drive past a pole. It's like a thick wooden pole. And it's engraved with that symbol that was on Ellen and Annie's necklaces from the funeral. That's suspicious. Peter finds Bridget at the party, the girl who, he was looking at her butt. And there's like this awkward conversation. He's trying to be cool. She's having literally none of it. She has zero interest until he busts out the weed. And she's like, oh, there's a bong in the other room. Now, poor Peter, I do kind of feel for him. He thinks he's getting alone time with Bridget. No. Suddenly, his weed is everybody's weed now. So that's about it, So she takes him to a room with a few people. They all start smoking it. Enjoy this last moment of peace, because soon Charlie comes into the room. She ate the cake that was going about and it had nuts in it. She's going into anaphylactic shock. She can't breathe. The scene is it's intense, to say the least. Peter is trying to drive Charlie to the hospital because she's dying. He's high, he's speeding, and she is practically hanging out of the window because she cannot breathe. She's trying to get some air, and then there's this deer in the road, and then Peter swerves so they don't hit the deer, and then it's... They killed Charlie. Like, she was all over the marketing of this movie. Her and Annie were like the main figures in the poster when this came out. It's like roughly halfway through-ish. A little under, maybe. I can't remember the exact timestamp. They killed her. She's dead. 2 years on this. Yes, Peter swerved. She hit her head on that pole. And now she's dead. Her head is off of her body. It is on the road. Her body is in the car. Her head is on the road. Peter is in shock. I mean, he just killed his sister. Of course he is. He is so in shock. He drives her body home. Head's on the road, body's in the car. He drives her body home. He goes to bed. Annie is in bed with Steve, and we can hear her saying like, oh good, they're home. And she doesn't know that the next morning she goes to the car to go wherever she's going, and she finds Charlie headless and dead in the back of the car. This part is actually so hard to watch. Like, she's crying and wailing and screaming, and like Charlie's being buried, and we do see her head on the road after it's been left there overnight. And Annie is she's just struggling to cope. You know, she's struggling to find reason to go on after this. She starts sleeping in the treehouse like Charlie did. She sneaks out to the grief meetings and she keeps saying, I'm going to the movies. How many movies do you go to that this is a believable lie? Yeah, she sneaks out to the grief meeting for the first time since her mom died. This has been like a little bit of time, I think. And she's about to go in, but then, you know, I guess she decides like she can't do it, she can't face it. She turns around, you know, starts to turn the car around to go home. And this is where Joan comes into the movie. She chases her down, flags her down. Joan, actually, you can see her in that first group meeting scene after Ellen died, but she didn't say anything. She was just there. Here she, you know, she gives Annie like her contact details. She's like empathizing with her. She's like, empathizing that she's lost people. And like, here's a spoiler that I'm about to talk about in like 10 minutes anyway. Joan does not have Annie's best interests at heart. I want her to, but she doesn't. I want Annie to have a friend. That's all I want. But I had so much hope for Joan, but no. This is a sad film. Friendship isn't real. But there's at least this great little moment where, you know, Annie keeps trying to go home. She keeps trying to leave the conversation, and Joan keeps talking to her, and she just says, my son died. And Annie just goes, oh. It's not funny. It's not funny. That is literally how I would react if I was just trying to leave, you know, and the person was like, my son's dead. Like, I'm sorry. No, okay, so later, while Annie is working on her miniatures, the paint falls over by herself. No, it doesn't. It falls over by for God's sake. Later, when Annie is working on her miniatures, the paint just falls over by itself, like it's bright blue paint is rolling over this little table. It distracts her. You know, this kind of brings her back to Joan, because sitting next to that table, no, sitting next to the paint. Oh, I can't talk anymore. Sitting next to the paint on that little table was the piece of paper that had Joan's number. I got it out in the end. You know, she sees it trying to clean the paint up. She has a cup of tea with Joan. She's confiding in her about how she feels. She talks about this incident where she was sleepwalking. She covered Peter and Charlie with paint thinner, and just as she woke up, she had lit a match and was trying to burn them all. She obviously woke up before she could kill them, but Peter woke up as well, and let me tell you, that's gonna put a damper on a relationship with your parent. So, okay, speaking of Annie and Peter's relationship, we've got the dinner scene. Oh wow, the dinner scene. So it starts with Annie. She's working, and Steve comes in to her little workshop room, and he says, sorry, it's time for dinner. She says, oh, I'm making dinner. He's like, no, I made dinner. I did it. And he's angry. He's snapping. Like he's mad at her for focusing on her work rather than making dinner, and it doesn't get much better. I think his anger is just more at her not paying attention and whatever, but it doesn't get much better from there. Like, the dinner itself is really awkward, and soon things bubble over, and Peter and Annie go watch. If you don't watch anything else from this movie, go watch this scene. It's so good. Everyone acting here is so good. Like, Peter looks so shocked and sad and a little bit scared, and Annie just blows up, like she's screaming, and her emotions they're just rushing out of her, that she's been holding it and bottling up until now. Steve looks like he's gonna cry. He looks angry, frustrated, he's grieving. They all look so sad and angry at the world and at each other, and it's like they don't even know how to rely on each other, because they've all been so closed off from each other that now they just kind of can't open up anymore. And so Annie is shouting and screaming, and Steve interrupts the flow of this outpouring, and she leaves. She withdraws from them, and this is, the state of her home life when she meets Joan again. So Joan and Annie meet again in the car park of a craft store. Joan's she's flustered. She's practically falling over herself to tell Annie how she went to see a medium, and she understands that Annie would be skeptical, because she was too, you know? And isn't it wonderful how now she can talk to her dead grandson again? You know, she gets Annie back to her flat, and she shows Annie how to channel the spirit so she can talk to Charlie. You know, it's pretty simple. You say this thing in a language that is probably Latin. I don't really know. You gotta make a bond with the spirit through an item. So for Joan's grandson, it's this old chalkboard. Now, that chalkboard, remember how I was saying Joan doesn't have Annie's best interests? Yet, if you look carefully during that scene in the car park, you can see that chalkboard. That kid didn't have that chalkboard for years. Joan bought it. She had it for like an hour. So whatever she's talking to, I don't know who it is, but it might not be her grandson. Anyway, the seance does work, and Annie understandably freaks out. So after this, she starts having her nightmares. You know, she dreams. She tells Peter that she'd never wanted to be his mother, but, you know, she loves him very much. Of course she does. I mean, I don't mean that to sound sarcastic. She genuinely loves her family. She's just having a hard time dealing with things emotionally, and then, you know, suddenly the two of them are doused in paint thinner, and oh, suddenly the two of them are on fire. Maybe she thinks she can mend the bonds with her family with the seance, like getting some kind of a closure after what had happened with Charlie. Of course that doesn't go so well. She actually though does convince both Steve and Peter to join her, which is actually pretty good, because Steve is like very, like, where Annie was pretty skeptical, Steve is very skeptical. I mean, you know, he's Dr. Steve. So it starts out all right. Not much is happening. Charlie's sketchbook is Annie's link to the spirit that she's using. You know, that's a little candle, blah, blah, blah. It's a seance scene. We've all seen seance scenes in movies. There's like subtle signs that something's going on. The characters pick up. Like Peter says the ear is flexing, which obviously you can't really show cinematically. Steve is the only one to pick up on anything. Kind of possessed by the spirit. Yes, asking why everyone is scared. Why are you scared of me? Where's my mom? I want my mom. It's switching in and out Annie's voice until Steve like throws water over her, which I guess interrupts the, I don't know, connection. But she comes back too. She's like herself again, and she doesn't remember what happened, and she doesn't know why her son is crying. God, I wish that was the worst thing that happened to this family, but no, we're still going. Okay, so when Peter is at school, which, okay, he should not be. Steve, doctor, therapist, psychologist, that's the word. Dr. Steve, why is your son in school? He's been through a lot. Your boy needs therapy. Why is he in school, Steve? He's at school, and he sees that same orb of light that Charlie saw, you know, when she, like, went outside with the pigeon head. He looks in this, like, cabinet thing that the light leads him to. It's, you know, one of those things in, like, English class, they store books in, like, a big cabinet, with, like, window panes. Just like that. He looks in the window at himself, and his reflection is smirking at him. He's not smirking, but his reflection is. That'll be like if while I was recording, I stopped talking and me and the camera just kept going. So Peter apparently called Steve, thinking something is after him. Steve kind of, you know, has a wee argument with Annie about it, and sort of insinuates he's protecting Peter from her. That her, you know, talk about ghosts and stuff is what's causing breakdown. So after this, okay, so she's not in a great headspace right now anyway, but she gets a voicemail from the gallery that she's promised this collection of miniatures to, but asks about the timeline of her project. And while she's hearing that voicemail, she like breaks a little chair, and then that's sort of it. You know, she goes into this like fit of anger. Steve finds her on the floor, just sat there, surrounded by the smashed remains of all her hard work. We see her working on that a lot, and she just breaks it all. So Peter sees Charlie standing in the corner of his room at night, and then her head rolls off, as you do, and now it's a ball rolling across the floor. Oh, so that would be a weird enough moment for him, but then, like, you know, some hands just sort of pop out of the wall, grab his head, like pulling at him, like they're trying to, you know, take it off. Annie comes in, and Peter blames her for sleepwalking and attacking him, and Annie's of course thinking like the spirit is malevolent, It's attached to me through Charlie's sketchbook. I can end this if I destroy that bond. So she goes downstairs to the living room to burn the book because they have a fireplace because they are very rich. And you know, she tosses the book in, but then her arm catches on fire. And it doesn't go out until she pushes the sketchbook out of the fire and puts it out. And by this point, Steve is sleeping on the sofa, and you can just like see him in the background just asleep. Like, my dude, you should have woken up. If you'd have woken up, this could have been different. So Annie tries to go to Joan for help, but apparently she's not home. But there is ritualistic stuff over her flat, and there's a photo of Peter. So this is where we, first time viewers, where you have it confirmed, Joan is pretty sus. Annie sort of looks at the doormat Joan has. It's a handmade one. She mentioned that her mother made some like it before. She kind of gets a little light bulb going on. She goes home, goes back through, you know, that box. She goes home and she goes back through that box full of Alan's stuff. And she finds a bunch of those same mats with, you know, her family's names. Like, there's Peter and there's Charles. Charlie did say Grandma wanted me to be a boy. In fact, it seems like Paimon wants to be a boy as well, because this is when Annie finds the book on Paimon, which is one of the kings of hell, and, you know, all her mom's cult stuff, which including photos from like this ritual where they're showering Ellen with gold coins, and photos where Joan is there. Joan is there. Joan. I wanted Joan to be a friend so badly, but no, that would be too much. Also, Ellen's in the attic. Remember I mentioned Steve gets a call that a grave was desecrated? Yeah, she's in the attic. Remember how Charlie saw her sitting surrounded by fire? Yeah, it's Ellen. She's burned, and now she doesn't have a head. So while this is going on, Peter is at school, and from like outside the grounds, Joan is watching him, which is kind of creepy, and she's yelling at him, you know, like, Peter, I expel you. When Peter is in class, his arm like shoots up, and like the teacher calls on him because of course, but Peter's not lifting his own arm. It's like a puppet on a string. That's what it looks like to me. And then, like it's letting him go and pushing him down, his face just slams into the desk and he just falls back screaming. And this moment is terrifying, and his son is scary as this is. And his screaming is so hard to hear. When I was rewatching the film, I noticed this one guy just like pull out his phone and just start filming Peter, which, okay, yeah, that's how a teenager would realistically react, but like, come on, man, you've had this kid in your class all year and he's screaming, and just give him a moment. I mean, okay, everyone's already watching him, but okay, it's not like, no, he doesn't need this moment immortalized, but spoiler, it's not gonna matter to Peter himself after tonight. Okay, so Steve drives him home. School calls him. Peter is unconscious. His nose is taped up because he, you know, smashed his face into his desk and broke it, probably. Annie, when they're driving home, Annie's like trying to tell them about, you know, Ellen in the attic, but of course, like, she sees the state of Peter, and understandably she's panicking over her alive son rather than her dead mother in the attic. She helps Steve carry him in. Steve, you know, settles Peter into bed, sleep, good night. And after that, Annie tells Steve about Ellen in the attic and how Charlie's sketchbook burns her when she tries to break the bond to stop this. And oh my god, there's this beautiful, heartbreaking scene as Annie says goodbye to Steve and begs him to throw the book in the fire because she's not strong enough to do it. And it shows just how much love really is still there. Annie's like sobbing. She's saying goodbye. You can see Steve trying to not break down himself. I mean, he's been through a lot. Like, I feel like he's as a character, he's kind of overshadowed. But you know, he's going through it. Steve, Dr. Steve, his reaction is completely within his character, and from his perspective is the best course of action. He says he's going to get Annie help. He won't play along with these games of hers anymore. It's not healthy for her, sorry. Annie gets frustrated. She grabs the book. She tosses it in the fire. But Steve burns up and dies. Like, this moment, this death is basically 2 for 1. Because Steve burns up, and that's... Annie is fully possessed. She's broken emotionally. She can't cope anymore. She's fully possessed now. So Peter wakes up and it's dark. He doesn't notice that Annie is crouched up in one of the corners of his room, like on the ceiling, like crouched up like that, but on the ceiling. He doesn't notice that. There's no sounds of life in the house, so he's gonna go have a look. He's gonna go try and find his parents. So he does. He finds Steve, Crispy, and if I remember right, that guy from the funeral, the creepy smiley one, he's in the background. He's naked. Because of course, why wouldn't he be? But that's actually not what Peter is most concerned about, because, here's Annie, and she's chasing him into the attic, and she's banging on the attic door, which, okay, context, an attic door is on the roof, right? It's in the ceiling. She's banging on that, and Peter is begging for her to stop, and it's so sad, and it becomes so creepy when it's shown. Like, she's banging fast, like bang, 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 and she's clinging to the attic upside down. Like it's like if she was kneeling on the floor, except she's on the ceiling, and she's banging with her head. Peter sees the outline of where Ellen was. She's gone now. Her body left a gross outline. In the middle of it is a photo, and it's him with his eyes carved out. And then the banging stops, and there's another sound. Annie is above him now, hovering, severing her own head with what I think is a piano wire. I think that's what it's called. And it's a combination of this. He turns around, there's 3 more naked cultists. He can't cope anymore. He screams, he launches himself out of the window. And he lies there on the ground. And the orb of light dances over him, disappears, and he rises. And he clicks, which is Charlie's little tick. She's little like. As Annie's corpse floats up into the treehouse, he follows her. And this final pet check is where we see little Rexy. We don't see him, as mentioned earlier, we don't see it in great detail, but god damn it, the dog is dead. So in there's the cult. Annie and Ellen, and they are all kneeling before a statue with Charlie's head on top of it, and there's a crown popped up there. Joan stands up. Aside from, his 2 dead family members, she's actually the only one not naked. And Joan gets up and she takes the crown off of Charlie's old head and puts it onto Charlie's new head. Joan calls Peter Charlie and then tells him he's actually the demon Paimon. They have corrected his first female form. The cultists give him a hearty round of Hail Paimon. The camera zooms out and it ends like it began, with a dollhouse. The treehouse suspended in darkness with these little figures yelling Hail Paimon. Okay, by my estimate, that is the entirety of a 2-hour movie in about 20 minutes. I did say up top that, you should go and watch the movie for the full experience, because obviously, me sitting here isn't the same. But, if you didn't, that's the short version. That's the version in which we're all on the same page. So, let's start with the question I think everybody had leaving the cinema. What's up with Paimon? He kind of comes in seemingly quite abruptly in the last little bit there. It took some effort, but I think I know where Paimon is throughout this, who has him. So, we're starting with Ellen. In the photos in her scrapbook, the ritual that they do is what I think summons Paimon for, like, the prosperity of those in the cult. Now, Annie says she wasn't all together there at the end, but in the photo she seems lucid enough and healthy, so I think the ritual took place quite a while in the past. So I think she acts as a temporary host and tries to give Paimon a more permanent host in her son, who is Annie's brother. I think with Paimon, when somebody's a host for him, the only way to fully release him is by decapitation, and to receive him, someone has to either be willing to share their body or completely broken down to allow him to take control. So with that in mind, I think this is, why Ellen died of natural causes instead of by a demon, because she was willing. By the time Ellen was like even kind of successful in by the time Ellen was like, even kind of successful in getting her son to be a host for Paimon, Annie said that his suicide note blamed Ellen for putting people in him. Now, I did say that decapitation is how to release Paimon, but I think because it maybe wasn't a full possession It just says that he hung himself. You know, it didn't say he hung himself and his head came off. It might have. We don't know. But, you know, I'm calling this like a metaphorical decapitation for an almost possession. I mean, you know, it's the metaphors or whatever that, Ellen's husband starved himself to death, which obviously is completely horrific. And I don't know, maybe she tried to put Paimon in him. I don't think she did, because that's not decapitation. And the cult never tried to do it with Steve. I think it has to be within Ellen's bloodline, which is why it's important that during the seance, Peter could feel the air flexing, but Steve couldn't, because Peter is obviously in Ellen's bloodline. He's a direct descendant. Steve isn't. He's an outsider in terms of the familial bloodline. Ellen's husband is a little debatable, since he's not her bloodline, and that wasn't a decapitation, but she would have had a lot of influence over him. I don't know. Maybe his suicide was purely mental illness related and not demon related. We are going to talk about mental illness, so that's coming later, so strap in. We have more. We're only just starting. I think after the attempt with her son failed was when she started putting pressure on Annie to have kids, because at that point she thought, you know, if Annie has kids and she has a boy, there's a new host. She didn't want to put the demon in Annie because Annie wasn't a male host, but she had damaged her relationship with Annie so much that by the time Annie was actually, you know, she had Peter, Steve had helped Annie to keep Ellen away from them, but Ellen was very manipulative, and she got her way back into their lives. You know, by the time Charlie was born, she latched on to the wee kid. She breastfed Charlie. I don't know how possible that is, but apparently she did. Maybe this was like feeding her Paimon? I don't know. I think she was effectively transferring Paimon into. I think that's what Charlie had picked up on, you know, when she said Grandma wanted me to be a boy, was so that Paimon would have a male form. I think by the time, you know, she was bonding, let's call it that, with Charlie, Ellen knew she was starting to run out of time. She was getting old. She didn't know if Annie was going to have another kid. You know, she's already had 2. And I suppose she didn't know if she would be able to stick around long enough to grow up and have children. If she didn't give Paimon to somebody, the ritual they did would have been for nothing. So I think by Ellen's death, Paimon was almost like all but completely inside Charlie. So like, you know, in the scene where after the funeral where she's saying, who's going to take care of me? I don't know how much of that is Charlie and how much of that is Paimon. It's the same thing when she said Grandma wanted me to be a boy, which is something I gotta keep that in mind. That, you know, this may not 100% be Charlie saying these things. Okay, so by Ellen's death, Paimon basically lives in Charlie, but can't fully take her over as a host because his connection with Ellen hasn't been severed. You know, he's been rooted there for years, you know? When that is why the cult dug her back up and ritualistically burned and decapitated her. I also think that little orb of light that was like floating about, I think that's Paimon. Or like the visual representation of him. Like I don't know, but that's, you know, it's like Charlie sees the Paimon light, and then it's a little after that Ellen gets decapitated, and then that's when Annie forces Charlie to go to the party. So I suppose this is when the cult is just like, you know, let's move through this family and get to the boy. We can probably do this, you know? I say they killed her. I think they did orchestrate her death. The wooden post, it had like their symbol engraved on it, the one she died on. So I think they definitely had something to do with it. And it was all to try and get to Peter as a host. Now, in that book, the Book of Paimon, it mentioned that it possesses the most vulnerable person. And after Charlie's death, even after he technically killed his sister, Peter wasn't the most vulnerable. It was Annie. And after Steve died, which I think the reason he burned was Paimon using him to break Annie down completely. That was it, you know? Like that shot where her face just goes slack. That is her being possessed and completely taken over. That isn't Annie anymore. That is Paimon. But he still wants his male form. He still wants Peter. Takes completely overwhelming him and making him watch his mother saw her own head off and see all these naked strangers in his house and his dead dad and just everything. That made him vulnerable enough. That made him tossed himself out the window and made him open to Paimon. Now, Annie decapitates herself, which releases Paimon from her, and then goes into Peter because he's broken enough. Peter is his male form. Now, if I say Paimon is trans, can we please not do to him or to them what we did to the Babadook and make them a gay icon? Oh, and that also happened to Pennywise. Like, can we not do that? He's a demon. I'm not saying, like, can we not do that? It also happened to Pennywise. Why did it happen to Pennywise? Why did it happen to the Babadook? Really? But can we not do that? Okay, but all jokes aside, if I say there's a discussion around gender identity in a horror movie with a demon, people are gonna look at me funny until I talk about Charlie mentioning Grandma wanted me to be a boy. Until I talk about Annie mentioning she was a tomboy growing up. You know, is that maybe Ellen enforcing male rules onto her? Until I talk about the line, we have corrected your first female form. Do I think Paimon is a transphobic entity? No. I think it's commentary about enforced gender by those around you. So the book says Paimon is a male entity and therefore wants a male form. The book tells us that. The book is something that somebody else wrote about Paimon. Paimon possesses the most vulnerable person available. It's the cult that leads him to Peter. He fully possessed, the other members of that family before Peter, but it was the cult pushing him to Peter. To me, this is like enforcing gender. It is an experience of many trans kids that, unfortunately their parents or their families even aren't supportive of them and who they are, and they try to enforce their assigned gender at birth rather than their actual gender. And that's very harmful. To me, the passing of the possession and the efforts of the cult to get it specifically into a male form, destroying the family on the way, is like how destructive transphobia is for trans individuals and who experience it, and how it can damage them and their relationships with their family. I mean, it's no secret that trans kids are more at risk of suicide and self-destructive behaviors if they're not supportive. It's no secret that trans kids are more at risk of suicide and of self-destructive behaviors, if their families and people around them aren't supportive of them and who they are. I mean, wow, what a concept. Right, supporting your child leads to a happier, healthier child that doesn't kill themselves. If they do make it to adulthood, the person might cut their family out of their life completely. End up and they find a home with like a chosen family rather than their given family. In terms of the film, I suppose the question is, who does Paimon end up with? Because if we are taking Paimon as the trans kids, the actions of the cult strip away those potentially supportive relationships and leave only the controlling relationships of the cult. They say they worship him. It's almost like gaslighting, we love you. You can't be abused by us because we love you and we worship you. Therefore, this is your body, this is a gender, this is your name. This is who you are. It's control, and it's the control. And, if we were talking about a child rather than a demon, this would be seen as abuse with the veneer of love covering it. So if we're shifting the focus away from Paimon for a hot second, we turn to Ellen. She's obviously a massive driving force within the film. She's a figure almost constantly looming over Annie, who sees her in the dark corners of the room. She makes figures of her standing in the doorway of her bedroom. Did I say in the doorway of the room? Shifting the focus away from Paimon, we turn to Ellen. She's obviously a massive driving force within the film. A figure almost constantly looming over Annie. She sees her in the dark corners of the room. She sees her in the figures that she makes of her standing in the doorway of her bedroom, of her taking baby Charlie away from her. At one point, very, very literally, the dark secret in the attic. Annie has a complicated relationship with her. She loves her because she's her mother, and she resents her because of how manipulative she's been throughout her entire life. It was Ellen who was the one pushing Annie into having kids. Annie tells us this herself. You know, like in the dream she has where she tells Peter she never wanted to be his mother. She says it was Ellen pushing her into having the baby. She said she tried to have a miscarriage, but it didn't work, and that she's happy now. You know, she loves her son. Of course she does. But I have to wonder if there's a fear of turning out like her mother. And if it wasn't for Ellen's insistence, would Annie ever have actually had children of her own free will? I mean, while Ellen possibly did cause her son's death, and the cult did cause her daughter Annie's death, Annie nearly caused the death of both her children in the paint thinner story. If you think about like motherhood and reproduction in this way, it's portrayed in horror. We kind of get a little bit more of an insight into this. So, okay, I'm going to get into theory, like full-on film theory for a moment. There's a book by Barbara Creed. It's called The Monstrous Feminist. Good book. It's about femininity in horror in relation to psychoanalysis. It was a good read, even though I have my own issues with Freud and pretty much the whole basis of psychoanalysis. I have my issues. The second half of the book focuses in more on the Freudian theory. Still, there's some use to it in terms of, but the second half is more psychoanalysis, but the first half is more horror and film theory. So, you know, we use this book, sprinkle in a dash of Julie Kristeva, who is another theorist, using these two as my main sources for my main inspirations, let's call it, for this little bit. Horror is scary to us because it crosses set boundaries of the self and of society. So, for example, Rosemary's Baby is scary because it crosses the boundaries of individuality. Zombie movies are scary because it crosses the boundaries of death. Pregnancy can be scary because it crosses the body, the boundaries of the body, of the skin, you know? In any other situation aside from pregnancy, those symptoms would be horrifying. In the film industry, which is historically male-dominated, the ability to reproduce and to mother another can be scary. It gives a power to the individual that someone born male just can't get to. And to some, this might be threatening, especially in America, where Hereditary was set and produced. There's the ongoing debates about reproductive rights and Planned Parenthood that come through very strongly in the film, actually. For Ellen, you know, she's the mother to be afraid of. She's using her children as a means to an end, as vessels for a demon, or as production factories for more vessels rather than actual people. Barbara Creed calls this archetype the archaic mother, the mother who won't let go of her control of her children. We can also see it in Carrie, like her mother. We also see it a bit there. And this is very fitting for Ellen in that not letting go of that control, even in death. Using her cult as an extension of herself. You know, continue her control and manipulation of the family. So Ellen is not only the archaic mother, she's also representative of the pro-life debate. So, she's the one pushing Annie into having kids in the first place, not caring about what happens to them beyond her own goals, not caring if Annie even can provide the quality of life that the kids deserve. I mean, obviously financially, between her and Steve, they can. Mentally, can she? We don't know. Now, I don't know if but it seems everyone, everywhere, is super mad about everything. All the time. But all seriousness, there is a parallel to be drawn here between the pro-life movement and Ellen. I'm using the biggest air quotes there, who basically take away, you know, access to healthcare services like abortion. You know, not everyone who falls pregnant does it on purpose or is ready to be a parent. Annie wasn't ready to be a parent. How is it pro-life to, you know, take away that individual's decision to the rest of their life in favor of what at that point is a clump of cells? So the term of pro-life comes from them apparently standing for the potential life of this clump of cells. This is a largely conservative / Republican view, depending on where you are. And another one of their views seems to be in taking aid away from parents. So, whether that be like difficulty in accessing food stamps in America or like free school meals in the UK. Seems that pro-lifers only really care about the life until it's born. Then you're on your own, kids. Like, I'm sorry, but what? In terms of the film, Ellen is a fun combination of this and the archaic mother. She uses her own children as demon hosts. She pressures Annie into having kids to make more demon hosts. She not only disregards Annie's individuality as a person and everyone else's for that fact, she also disregards I'm getting mad. Annie is Ellen's child. No matter how old she gets, Ellen is still her mother. And a child has a right to safety from their parents. Ellen ignores that, completely disregards that. It's very fitting for a horror movie, though, since Western society tends to put so much emphasis on individuality. Why can't I say that? and it's important. So to a Western audience, it's terrifying, the concept that your mother, the person who's supposed to take care of you and protect you, could be such a source of your misery. In that dream where Annie talks about, trying to have a miscarriage, and she dreams she burns herself and Peter alive with the paint thinner. Annie tells Peter, I was trying to save you. Save him from what? Like, on a surface level, sure, you could argue, save him from the demon, from the cult. But there was no realistic way for Annie to know about that when she was pregnant with him. That's, depending on how old Peter is, 16, 17, it's maybe 17 or 18 years ago. Like, in the group therapy session, Annie tells us there's a history of mental illness in her family. Ellen had DID, her father had depression, her brother had schizophrenia, maybe also a demon. She herself has issues expressing her emotions. She's prone to bouts of anger. She's a bit paranoid. Peter is apathetic. Charlie has a vocal tic. There's no diagnoses offered for Annie and her kids. The only ones who get an official, this person had a mental illness, is Ellen and Annie's father and Annie's brother. And obviously, for Annie and her kids, quite a bit of it will be the effect of grief. That is sadly what grief can do to a person. Although Charlie seems to have had the tic from before. But it's possible that this genetic predisposition to mental illness is what Annie wanted to save Peter from. Even though Peter seems to have largely escaped the hereditary mental illness, he couldn't escape the hereditary demon. It's a bad joke, but that is what's hereditary. The mental illness, the demon, all of it. It's passed down from Ellen through her bloodline. So at the end of it all, we have Paimon, the gender identity crisis demon. We have Ellen, the pro-life archaic mother infecting everyone in her bloodline with gender identity crisis demons. And we have Annie, who's a scared woman trying to protect her children while also trying to not become her own mother. First time watching it, it is a dark... I have lost track of how many times I have seen it by this point. It is still a dark, sad film, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more to it than that. The more you watch it, you pick up all these little details, and it's beautiful, and it's tragic, and it's really well crafted and well made, while still being so accessible to horror fans. And also, side note, the words on the walls. So it's I have written here, it's Seijani and Zazas. Like those ones that strike a chord with Annie so much that she paints them into her miniatures, and that, like, in that scene where the paint falls over, leading her to Joan, that's what she's painting them in. I think they're spells. When Joan yells at Peter from outside the school gates, before she starts yelling like, I expel you, presumably meaning I expel you from your body, she says, oh lord, Xantand, Dagdani, a paragon. Like, she yells these things at Peter. I think, like, these little spells that they wrote about the house, maybe there's more. that we never saw in the film. But I think that's part of how the cult kept their control over what was happening. And he mentions that, you know, Ellen did live with them for a little bit, so it could just be that she gave the cult a copy of the key, and that's how they've been getting into the house. It could be something as mundane as that, and they've just been going in and writing it on the walls. That is Hereditary. I saw it in the cinema, and I absolutely loved it 2 years ago, and I love it now. This series really is something I wanted to do for a while. I'm really happy to be able to start off this series with this film because I just love it so much. I will at some point be taking a look at Ari Aster's second feature-length film, Midsommar, which came out in 2019. Near enough a year, almost exactly, if I remember right, a year later than Hereditary, but it is December. It is the festive season. So next time I will be looking at Better Watch Out. You better watch out. You better watch out. You better watch out. If you liked this video, feel free to, you know, leave a like and a comment and let me know what you thought of this. Was there anything you think I missed? Let me know, and subscribe as well to know when I upload my overthinking and my ramblings. And until then,